What happens when he gave water to a giant Apache girl, and next day, 300 warriors surrounded his ranch. Witness this unbelievable, true-inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. The sun beat down mercilessly on the New Mexico territory in the summer of 1879. For rancher Samuel McKenzie, it was just another scorching afternoon as he rode the fence line of his modest cattle ranch, checking for breaks and making sure his small herd had access to the few remaining water sources that hadn't dried up completely. The drought had been brutal that year, claiming livestock and testing the resolve of even the most stubborn settlers. Samuel was a solitary man, a former Union soldier who had come west after the Civil War seeking peace and a fresh start. He had built his ranch from nothing, respecting the land and keeping mostly to himself. Unlike many of his neighbors, he had no particular hatred for the Apache people who still roamed these territories. He understood this had been their land long before any white man arrived with deeds and property claims. As he crested a small ridge, something unusual caught his eye. In the distance, near his main well, he saw a figure collapsed on the ground. Even from far away, he could tell something was different about this person. As he rode closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was a girl, an Apache girl, but unlike any he had ever seen. She was enormous, easily 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and powerful limbs that spoke of incredible strength. Despite her size, she couldn't have been more than 16 or 17 years old. She lay unconscious in the dirt, her lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration, her breathing shallow and labored. Samuel dismounted quickly, his canteen already in hand. Every instinct told him he was walking into danger. The Apache Wars were still raging across the Southwest, and helping an Apache, even a dying girl, could bring swift and terrible retribution from both sides. His neighbors would call him a traitor. The army might arrest him for aiding the enemy. But looking down at her face, seeing the youth still evident despite her unusual size, Samuel couldn't walk away. He had seen too much death in the war. He had held too many dying boys, both blue and gray, in his arms. He couldn't let another young person die when he had the power to help. He lifted her head gently, surprised by the weight, and trickled water between her parched lips. At first, she didn't respond, and fear gripped his heart that he was already too late. Then she coughed, sputtered, and her eyes flickered open. They were dark brown, almost black, filled with confusion and suspicion. She tried to pull away, but she was too weak. Samuel kept his movements slow and calm, the way he would approach a frightened horse. He continued giving her water in small sips, speaking softly in English, knowing she probably couldn't understand him but hoping his tone would convey his peaceful intentions. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're safe. Just drink slowly." When she had consumed nearly his entire canteen, some strength returned to her body. She pushed herself up to a sitting position, and even seated, she was nearly as tall as Samuel standing. Her eyes studied him with fierce intelligence, trying to understand why this white rancher was helping her instead of killing her or leaving her to die. Samuel knew he should probably let her go on her way. But the sun was setting, and she was still clearly weak. Against his better judgment, he gestured toward his small ranch house visible in the distance. He pantomimed eating and drinking, trying to communicate his offer of food and shelter. The girl watched him carefully, then slowly nodded. She attempted to stand, but nearly collapsed again. Without thinking, Samuel moved to support her, shocked again by her size and weight. Together they made their way slowly to his ranch house. That evening was one of the strangest of Samuel's life. He prepared a simple meal of beans, bread, and coffee while the Apache girl sat at his table, her massive frame making his furniture look like children's toys. She ate ravenously, clearly having gone without food for days. He didn't ask questions she couldn't answer, and she offered no explanations. They existed in a bubble of wordless understanding, two people sharing a meal despite the war raging around them. When she finished eating, she stood and moved to the door. She turned back to look at Samuel, and in her eyes, he saw something that made his blood run cold, not with fear but with premonition. It was a look that said this was not over, that his kindness would have consequences, though whether good or bad, he couldn't tell. Then she was gone, disappearing into the desert night with surprising speed for someone who had been half dead hours before. Samuel barely slept that night. He kept his rifle close, uncertain what the morning would bring. Part of him hoped the girl had simply returned to her people and that would be the end of it. Another part of him, the part that had learned to trust his instincts during the war, knew something significant was coming. Dawn broke clear and bright. Samuel was checking on his horses in the small corral when he heard it, the thunder of hoofbeats, hundreds of them, coming from the north. His heart hammered in his chest as he ran to his porch, rifle in hand, and looked out at the horizon. What he saw would be burned into his memory forever. Warriors, Apache warriors, at least 300 of them, surrounding his ranch in a vast semicircle. They sat on their horses, silent and still as statues, painted for war, armed with rifles, bows, and lances. It was the largest gathering of Apache fighters he had ever seen, representing multiple bands united for some unknown purpose. Samuel's mouth went dry. This was it. His kindness to the girl had been discovered, and now he would pay with his life. He thought briefly about running, but there was nowhere to go. He was surrounded. At least he would die standing, defending his home. Then the line of warriors parted, and through the gap rode 3 figures. The girl from yesterday was one of them, now dressed in ceremonial clothing, looking even more imposing in the morning light. Beside her rode an older warrior whose bearing and decorated clothing marked him as a chief, and next to him, an ancient woman whose face was a map of wrinkles, and whose eyes held the wisdom of decades. They rode forward slowly until they were just 20 feet from Samuel's porch. He stood frozen, rifle lowered but ready, waiting to see if these were his last moments on earth. The old woman spoke first, in surprisingly clear English. "You gave water to this girl, the daughter of Chief Ni. You gave food. You gave shelter. You asked nothing. You took nothing." "What?" Samuel swallowed hard, finding his voice. "She was dying. I couldn't let her die." The old woman translated to the chief, who nodded slowly. Then the giant girl herself spoke, her voice deep and powerful, in halting English. "I am Desba. They call me this because I went to war. I am big, like warrior. My father is chief. You saved Chief's daughter." The chief spoke in rapid Apache, and the old woman translated. "Chief Nate says the white men want our land. They kill our people. They break every promise. But you, Samuel McKenzie, you saw Apache girl dying and you helped, not because she was useful, not because she was beautiful, because it was right thing to do." Samuel's grip on his rifle loosened. "It was the only thing I could do." The old woman smiled, revealing gaps where teeth once were. "Chief says you are a different white man. You have honor. You have Apache heart even though you have white skin." Desba stepped forward, pulling something from a pouch at her belt. It was a beautifully crafted knife in a leather sheath, decorated with intricate beadwork. She held it out to Samuel. "Gift. From father. From me. You are friend to Apache now." The Samuel took the knife with trembling hands, understanding the enormous significance of this gesture. In the middle of a brutal war, he had somehow earned the friendship and protection of one of the most powerful Apache chiefs in the territory. The old woman continued, translating as the chief spoke again. "Your ranch is under protection of Chief Nate. No Apache warrior will harm you or take your cattle. If you need help, send message. We will come. You showed mercy when you could have shown cruelty. This we do not forget." Then the chief raised his hand, and as one, the 300 warriors wheeled their horses and began to ride away. Within minutes, they had disappeared into the landscape as if they had never been there at all, leaving only dust and hoofprints as evidence of their presence. Samuel stood on his porch for a long time, the knife heavy in his hands, trying to process what had just happened. His simple act of kindness, done without thought of reward, had earned him something precious and rare: the respect and protection of people who had every reason to hate him for the rest of his life. Samuel McKenzie never had trouble with Apache raiders. While his neighbors' ranches were sometimes targeted, his remained untouched. Occasionally he would find gifts left near his well: fresh meat, beautifully tanned hides, beaded items. He never saw who left them, but he knew. Years later, when the Apache wars finally ended and the tribes were forced onto reservations, Samuel testified before Congress about the honor and humanity of the Apache people. He told the story of Desba and her father, of the 300 warriors who could have killed him but instead offered friendship. Most of the politicians dismissed his testimony as the ravings of an Indian sympathizer, but Samuel didn't care. He knew the truth. He had learned that mercy and kindness could